Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I'm joined once again by Christian Selig. Christian, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure's all mine. It's great to be back.
This is your second appearance, so I'm glad to have you back. We met in April back in Chicago, and now having you on, quite a bit has changed since then, which we'll get into. But I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself for people who don't know.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an iOS developer from Eastern Canada. I've been doing the whole indie developer thing, I guess, for about 10 years now. Ever since I graduated university, I started working on kind of a Reddit app to scratch my own itch called Apollo, and I worked on that up until a few months ago, and that's kind of my, I guess, claim to fame. And on the side of that, I also work on kind of like a little virtual pets app called Pixel Pals, which has been a lot of fun to work on as well.
And we'll definitely be talking about Pixel Pals in a bit. But I think today, like, the Apollo story has been in the press. We're like, 2 months after everything blew over.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to first kind of just talk about, where'd you get the idea? Because I've had you on. We've talked about this, but just for folks who don't know, where did you get the idea of Apollo and, kind of the origin story of it?
Yeah. I wish I had like a super original story for kind of how I come up with apps, but most of the time it's just kind of scratching my own itch. Like I'm just, there's something out there that's missing that I'm looking for. Maybe it's something I use a lot. Like I used Reddit a lot. And you kind of just want to, when you're using something a lot, you just want to have the best experience possible doing it. And as a developer, you kind of have the means to kind of create that reality. So for me, a lot of the stuff I create is just kind of, I'm not completely 100% pleased with everything that's out there, even if they're like 99% great. And it's just that little bit extra I want to maybe contribute a little bit to. And that's kind of where I get started. And that was how Apollo started. There's some phenomenal Reddit apps out at the time. Like there was Alien Blue was still in its heyday. And yeah, don't get me wrong, these apps are phenomenal, but it's just one of those things where software is so personal, and everyone has kind of a different approach to how they use things. And for me, I wanted something just a little different and something that felt a little bit more like if Apple themselves built it. Like a really iOS first and foremost Reddit experience. And that was what I set out to build with Apollo, and thankfully that resonated with quite a few people throughout kind of like the initial posts on Reddit where I was previewing it. And it kind of took on a life of its own and became my full-time job for a long time.
I mean this in the best way. Apollo is a very addictive app. It was good. It was it was the best. Did you win at design awards and stuff? Besides being plugged as a future app for the Vision Pro, what other design awards did you win?
I don't know if I actually got any awards. I got like a few, like at least from Apple, I'll say, like a few nice like publications gave me like some accolades over the years, which was really nice. And of course, like it was always really cool to be in some of like the Apple keynotes being mentioned there. But yeah, no actual like Apple Design Award yet, so we'll stay tuned for that.
Yeah. So the other question that I wanted to cover was like, besides what happened this year, what was your biggest challenge developing the app?
It's honestly, for me, it's just like designing stuff. Like being someone who does the design work and the programming work, like there's such different disciplines, and that when you're programming something, there's like typically like a finite point where you can put a bow on it and ship it out the door when like there's no bugs, everything's scrolling well, it's performant, everything's kind of acting as it should. But when you're designing things, it's much more of a vague kind of nebulous concept. Mm-hmm. And reconciling those two things, I think, still gives me trouble to this day, where there's a lot of times where I'll be trying to design something and I just can't quite nail it down. And in my head, there's like going to be this point where it just clicks, like almost like a math equation or something in programming. Okay, that's it. That has to be it. But the reality is that never comes. There's always compromises with design. Like one of the big ones with Apollo that I really struggled with was kind of having like some people call it sloppy swiping, where you can swipe from like anywhere on the screen to go back and forth. And that's really comfortable because you got these big ass phones and you're holding them in one hand. You're maybe carrying groceries or a toddler in the other. being able to kind of grab anywhere on the screen to go back a page, it's really comfortable. But at the same time, in doing so, you lose the ability to do any like cool gestures on like a specific post because that becomes the back gesture. So it's little stuff like that where I remember sitting with that for a while and being kind of like, gosh, how do you reconcile that? And the answer, kind of stuff like that I've learned, is just you can't. You best case scenario, you make an educated guess, and if people push back and want the other thing, you kind of just offer it as a setting, and that tends to be the thing that works the best in my experience. But yeah, for me, honestly, it's been design is always the trickiest thing to kind of nail down, and takes me the longest time, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
I definitely want to ask about that later when we talk a bit about your work with SwiftUI. But yeah, because
sure.
I remember in the last episode you talked quite a bit about design notebooks and using those, and those being a way to like to just get your ideas started. And but we'll talk about that in a bit, because I have a few questions about that.
For sure.
All right, so let's just get into it. For those who don't know, I have been living under a rock. What happened with Apollo and Reddit? I'm sorry that you have to. I'm sorry you have to mention this for the 100th time. But
no, I think it's well rehearsed at this point. It's quite straightforward, I guess. There was historically, I guess, like I think the Reddit API was introduced in about 2008, and historically and that was most of Reddit's life. I think Reddit itself was like 2007 or something. So you've had this API, which is just kind of a way for services like apps to kind of communicate with Reddit and get kind of like a two-way communication street where you can say like, hey Reddit, could you give me the post in this subreddit or the comments on this post, or could you upvote this post? And it was this interface for talking with Reddit. And that's what API stands for, Application Programming Interface. And it was really helpful because for a long time, again, I think most of Reddit's history, they didn't have a first-party official Reddit app. So they kind of relied on third-party apps. If you wanted to browse Reddit on your iPhone beyond just the website, they relied on these third-party developers building these application experiences for iOS or Android or Windows Phone, what have you, using this API to build these experiences that people loved. Eventually, Reddit came and released their own first-party app after buying up one of the original third-party apps, Alien Blue. And it's kind of been smooth sailing since then. And but the thing is, since it's kind of been a mutually beneficial arrangement where third-party developers are building these Reddit experiences for users. So maybe if you're not jiving with the first-party app, you have this alternate option where you can still keep browsing Reddit. Or historically, if there wasn't even an official app, these third-party apps filled this like really important space. So there's kind of this like mutual. The API is free, but it gives both parties some really nice benefits. And as Reddit kind of started like tightening their bootstraps a little bit, it became clear that they were like maybe looking to maybe monetize the API a little bit, and they reached out to developers. I want to say it is a little far removed now. I want to say it was late April that they reached out. They made a post and said, we're looking to change the API a little bit. And then they started calling developers like myself with third-party apps later and said, hey, we're looking to monetize the Reddit API. So insofar as like you guys generate like a fair bit of server traffic, and we're not necessarily seeing like the ad revenue from when users use your apps. So we'd like kind of a slice of that pie and you to pay your fair way. And it was kind of honestly like, great, that sounds totally reasonable on paper. And it's one of those things where it really had the potential to be awesome for both parties because there's been extra features added on Reddit, like Reddit chat, kind of this instant messaging thing, and stuff like that, where Reddit hasn't added that to the API. So there was initially a lot of excitement about, like maybe if we enter in this more formal paid arrangement with Reddit, we'll also get these benefits. So great.
And the relationship
awesome.
could be more stable.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We kind of both know where both parties stand.
Yeah.
But it's like anything, like the proof's in the pudding. What is the actual price going to be? That kind of dictates everything. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, they announced this big pricing change without having any pricing, which was kind of confusing. But they ultimately said, like, we'll get it in a few weeks. And a few weeks went by. And then they ended up, I think after 2 months, they finally got the pricing out. And it was like eye-wateringly high, to the extent that, like, during the discussions over those 2 months, they were saying stuff like, we don't want to pull a Twitter because Twitter famously, like, killed third-party apps a few months earlier and then made the API prices like astronomically high to the extent that it just suffocated everybody but Twitter themselves. And Reddit was like, no, we don't want to do that. We're not going to pull a Twitter. We're not going to pull an Elon. And then the pricing they came out with was like remarkably similar to Twitter's pricing. So it was kind of one of those things where people were saying, okay, like this is not jiving with any of your previous statements. Like this kind of doesn't make any sense. This isn't what you were saying. And they also on top of that saying, okay, and you have 30 days from now before you start getting charged for this, or start incurring fees for using the API. So you were kind of hit with this 1-2 punch of this like astronomically high price. And like to put that to a number, like Apollo's pricing would be $20 million a year. And when the previous year it cost $0. So it was this astronomically high price that they were like saying developers have to pay or we'll turn off your API access. And you have 30 days to make it happen. And it was kind of just like it quickly like I think every developer I talked to, since we all were talking, of course, over the course of all this, we're trying to make it very clear to Reddit, like this is not tenable at all. Like we don't have millions, tens of millions of dollars at our disposal just to like throw at this, especially with 30 days notice. And this is just going to sink us. And yeah, and that's kind of where things deteriorated from there, where it got to the point that I don't think Reddit wanted to listen anymore, and they were kind of adamant, and this is what it's going to be. And it fundamentally, I think, just killed the entire third-party ecosystem, like as happened with Twitter as well. Yeah, and it was kind of weird because, funnily enough, like I also talked to them the January, like that stuff started in April, but the January I was also talking to them, and they were like very adamant that like, hey, we have no plans to change the API this year. Everything's good. Like, if anything, it'll be in like coming years, and it'll be with like positive changes. So it was this very quick like turn of events that they just started like absolutely like hammering through these changes as fast as humanly possible, with little regard for like timelines or talking to developers or really anything that would indicate like forethought and reason.
So and to like, I'll just mention, like they basically, you know, tried to character assassinate you and make up all sorts of stuff. And yeah, like it seems to me like, well, go ahead. I'll let you, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, it got weirdly personal at points where it was like we were having these back and forths on phone calls a lot. So we were like talking and getting to know each other. And I think there was this initial, like, I just don't think fundamentally they had done their due diligence in planning this change. So I think there was, when developers started talking about these numbers, like $20 million a year, like 30 days notice, like posting these like factual statements kind of on Reddit to kind of contextualize the situation, there's like immediately a lot of blowback toward the administration on Reddit. And I think they were kind of caught off guard, just because for some reason they expected this to go over well. And I think at that point, especially some of the upper management, the CEO started to kind of like take things like personally, rather than kind of like taking a step back and viewing it objectively. And it got to points where like, yeah, there was like discussions where I was saying like, hey, if Apollo's costing you like this amount, this nebulous $20 million a year, like just acquire it like you did with Alien Blue or whatever for like $10 million a year. And they somehow interpreted that as like a hush payment, like mafia style or something. And I very quickly squashed that and said, no, like that's not the intent at all. And that they apologized for misunderstanding. And you kind of think that's
Canadian hush money. Yes. That's
exactly. We're very well known for shaking down billionaire corporations. So I kind of like they apologized for misunderstanding, and I kind of thought that was that. And then you hear through like on like the moderator calls, like a moderator friend messages you and saying like, yeah, like the CEO's going on calls saying you were like blackmailing them for $10 million and stuff. And you're just like, what on earth? And thankfully, like Canada's a one-party consent state for recording phone calls. So I was like, and not out of like any like nefarious intent, but just because,
just
like,
record keeping you on you forget stuff. No, I get it.
Yeah, we had like probably like 10 calls over the course of those like several months. So just being able to go back and be like, oh, okay, so like this was what was said, not this. Like you kind of just lose track of things. So I was saying like, and I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, like did I have like a brain aneurysm and I somehow did threaten them? Like let me go back and listen to this. And it was like, no, it was exactly how I remember. They apologized for misunderstanding the entire conversation. So it was kind of one of the things where you post that and say like, hey, look, they're trying to say like, you know, some very serious accusations that are just, you know, objectively false based on a recording I have. And I think that was the point where they said like, oh, okay, like now we're now you want to go to war, which is like was also very confusing to me, because it was kind of a thing like, if the roles were reversed and the CEO and I said like the CEO was blackmailing me and said like, I'll allow Apollo to stay alive for $1 million, and I posted that and he had like a recording saying like the complete opposite, like I would very much expect him to kind of vindicate himself and show the reality of the situation. Like you kind of have to defend yourself when you're kind of pushed in that corner, especially with such like a massive character assassination. So I was kind of confused what they thought like what the recourse was. Like it was very, very peculiar, and it felt like a very, like the whole thing felt very unprofessional, quite frankly, for like $1 billion corporation to be engaging in.
Well, assuming they are $1 billion corporation, right? Like,
well, I mean, yeah, maybe not in liquid money, but like in terms of valuations, I think they're still at like several $1 billion, or at least that were at one point.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I'm just gonna kind of ask what kind of the feeling that I've gotten from the whole story was that A, they never had a plan, and B, the head didn't know, like the foot didn't know what the head was wanting. And the head, being the CEO, doesn't know like, oh, this is what we need to do for public IPO, right? Like, oh, we got to do this, we got to do that, and they just keep changing their mind. And like, you know, who cares about Christian Siegelig's Apollo app, even though like people love it and moderators love it. Like, we'll do whatever it takes, and if he says something that sounds like hush money, well, there we can get him. And then, you know, I feel like they were just like trying to like figure out a way to like it was like not antagonize her
together,
but they didn't care, and it was like, yeah,
it just all felt very much like somebody woke up one day and saw like an earnings report and said like, oh my God, we're coming way under. We need to like, you know, make up some money here. Who do we squeeze? And then like from that conversation, they within 2 hours they had to plan. I'm obviously just speculating here, but it felt very much like they were just like kind of flying by the seat of their pants and coming up with a plan very impromptu. Because like honestly, the amount of times on phone calls where they said something like, oh, I'm not sure, let me get back to you, or like to very fundamental questions, like things like, oh, like there's all these APIs Reddit apps don't have access to, are those on the table? And it would be like, oh, that's a thing, like there aren't, like, oh, let me look into. And it was kind of like, if you're talking about APIs, like how do you not know that? Or they'd say like, do you know how big Apollo is compared to the first party app? And I said like, I don't, only you would know that, like I could theorize. And they said, oh, we don't know, I was asking you. And it was kind of like why wouldn't you look up that, you know, kind of prior to the call? And there was all these things where it was just, it felt very much like, oh my God, like I could go on it. They ended up removing like Apollo doesn't have ads, but they ended up like blocking third-party apps from like, as far as like a guideline goes, like you no longer can display ads in your app.
Right. Remember that was a big deal with Android folks, right?
Exactly. Because so many of them did that. And then the CEO kind of came out and said like, oh, I didn't know that was such a big deal. And it was like, how did you not do the due diligence to realize like, that's how so many of the Android ecosystem, like that was how they made money. Yeah. That's how they kept the lights on. Or like, yeah, it was bizarre how many things like that you were just like, wouldn't that be. And like, oh, and the worst thing that almost bothered me the most was that their iOS app is like very poorly annotated for like voiceover use from like people with like low vision or blindness. And it took until them realizing that the third-party apps were doing a really good job of annotating their apps and making sure, like Apollo has a very large blind community, or had a very large blind community using it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it kind of took them until they like killed all these apps to go, oh my God, our app doesn't work for blind people. Like blind people exist. And then like the whole blind community was kind of angry at them. And it was just like these little things where it was like, how did you not like talk to like a group or kind of like formulate a plan here before executing this? Because it felt very like 11th hour kind of trying to throw together a homework assignment before the teacher notices you didn't do the homework the night before. Like it was bizarre.
Do they like how much of a development staff do they have? I would assume.
Oh, I think it's pretty substantial, but it's just like,
or they just don't communicate, because why would you communicate with your development staff? Yeah.
I don't know, or it's just too many cooks in the kitchen, or kind of the message gets lost, or what is it? But
right.
like they certainly have like a substantial, impressive amount of engineers, and like I've met some of them at like WWDC. Like the engineers and the people who work on like the apps and whatnot are like super nice, very, very smart people. I think it's just one of those things where like upper management just is kind. I think they're kind of just like siloed away and not necessarily like talking to the right people. Or,
how do we get the public
right
IPO?
decisions.
What do we do about the public IPO? I don't care about anything but the public IPO. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression I got.
Yeah. Would you do it all again?
Oh my gosh, yeah, in a heartbeat.
Okay,
Like it was. Oh no, it was. Like I would do it again tomorrow. Like it was so much fun building that app. Like even today, like the Reddit community is so phenomenal. I don't hold the like higher up management and maybe the highest regards, but like the community itself at its core is just, it's a phenomenal community. Has a lot of like, there's no more diverse area of the internet in terms of interests. Where you can go and like find a community to talk about like basketball shoes versus like, you know, the best ice skates, or like there's just something for everything. And the community is so phenomenal there, and getting to work alongside them for so many years building something that I had so much fun building. Oh my God. Yeah. In a heartbeat.
Yeah. And I mean, you lived off of it for like at least almost a decade. So like,
oh yeah, it was,
I
was
mean,
like pretty much my everything.
I think, how many years did you get out of it? 8?
Well, it was, I think 7 were monetized. Like the first 2 years it was in like a beta where it was just free for everyone to be, while I kind of like figured out all the bugs and kind of got more feedback on what was working and what wasn't. But after about 2 years, the initial 1.0 came out. So yeah, it was all in all, it was about 9 years of like public work on it.
That's a decent run for an app.
I was saying, like, I think I said to someone else, like it's almost hard to be disappointed about this, because like who gets to like build like a quite successful app for 9 years alongside like hundreds of thousands of like really awesome like supporters who gave like incredible feedback and were really passionate about the app. And like that's something to be like, feel very fortunate about, not like kind of like, oh God, now it's gone. Like it's sad, of course, but it's like, holy shit, like not many people get that opportunity, and I do. That's not lost on me.
Or, you know, could be worse. You could be having a bill for $20 million in API calls. So you know,
exactly,
that's the worst case.
Bright side, yeah.
So one of the questions I got on Mastodon was, well, people were wondering about Lemmy. Any hope for Apollo for Lemmy, and what would be your deciding factors for it, or how do you come up with the decision that you have, I guess?
That's fair. It's a tricky decision for sure. It's one of those things where I think at this stage I'm good, and kind of like now that I've been like kind of removed from it for a month, I'm kind of excited to maybe try out a few different things.
Okay.
I like that Apollo kind of went out on top what it was, and kind of like Frankensteining it together for something else isn't something I'm super excited to do at the moment. And I think it's kind of like in the same way that Alien Blue kind of maybe passed the torch to other apps. I think maybe it's like generation 3 now, where I'm curious to see what other developers do with Lemmy apps and whatnot, and how the community grows, and all these kind of like open federated communities do, because I think it's like a really exciting time on the internet to be an internet user and have all these services popping up that are offering such a thing.
So, you know, I want to ask this because the last episode we talked about third-party APIs. What's like going into any new app at this point? What's your opinion of using anybody's third-party API, and how would you be able to be like judging whether, yeah, this is stable, or no, these people are going to screw me, or like, oh, it's federated, so like I don't have to worry about anything? Like, how do you make those decisions?
That's a great question. I think at this stage I'm like a little burnt, so I think I'm almost overly cautious, so I might not be the best person to ask that, because I feel a little cagey. But
no.
I think it's one of those things where it's like, if it's clear like that both parties benefit. I think like very much. I thought that was the impression that Reddit understood, and I think was unfortunately lost on them, that this was something that really benefited like especially power users to have. And so there was this kind of relationship where it's a give and take, and both parties are benefiting, and the APIs exist for beneficial reasons. And I think building for services like that, I think are a relatively safe bet, at least for a foreseeable future until maybe something changes, as it did with Apollo. But even so, if you can have like 9 years of good times building for a really awesome community and building something fun, like go for it. But for me, if I was to build something today, I think it would have to be, and it was using an API in such a core capacity as the core of the app. I think it would have to be something that was like federated in some capacity. So that there wouldn't be, one central power that could just kind of ruin everything for everybody.
Right.
But if it was like a side thing, like if I wanted to have like, I don't know, like YouTube thumbnails, like Apollo used the YouTube API to show thumbnails for YouTube videos when people post them. Like that feels pretty safe to use because if that ceases to exist, you just lose a thumbnail. So stuff like that I'm less worried about. But stuff that's at the core of the app, I think I'd be a little cagey about it at this stage just because I am so recently burnt.
Since the Elon apocalypse, we've seen a variety of like social media apps out there. None of them, and that probably wasn't the case 10 years ago, none of them have third-party APIs. And so like that definitely to me, like anything that's a social media app is pretty much like, even if they did offer a third-party API, I would not rely on it at this point because they want the ownership of the whole experience, ads and everything, and tracking and all that stuff. So I think like
100%.
that,
the internet was much more innocent and young and kind of exciting in a way that like it was people were excited to build. And like Reddit especially was a very like, and to this day is like, it's a very like techie kind of nerdy user base, and I think that played a lot to their having an API was that they were tinkerers themselves, and they kind of liked offering that.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that in the last episode. So, it's just much more of a techie crowd, so they were like more comfortable with that. And if there's more of like the developer social media thing, then I could see maybe that having an API. I think too,
I'd
like
be pretty careful.
But like the other thing is what you'll see companies do. Well, now they offer the social media app like this. Like Threads does not have a web app, right? It's just completely iPhone. So they like go whole hog and like that's what they focus their development on. But then the other thing is like, unless it's something that it's an API that you can somehow no longer need and do it yourself. I don't know what that means exactly, but like let's say you have some API that does transcription and you rely on a third-party API. Well, eventually you could just be like, screw it, I could just use machine learning locally and just do it that way.
Right. Or a different provider.
Yeah, that's always a possibility as well when it comes to a third-party API.
Oh, for sure. I think you just have to, like, it would be sad to live in an age of the internet where nobody relies on anyone else or talks to anyone else just because everyone's so afraid of each other. So I think it's understandable to have some sort of skepticism, but it's good. Like, that's the beauty of the internet. Everything talks to each other, and I think relying on that to a certain extent is totally fair. Just make your choices calculated.
Yes, well put. I wanted to ask you this: what do you think of ChatGPT?
Honestly, it's such a it feels like seeing the Wright brothers put
open
something
API.
up, and then and then being like, what do you think of airplanes? Like it's so young that I almost don't have a fully formed thought about what it means or what it can do. Like I will say, like some of the stuff it can do, and some of the stuff like Midjourney can do is mind boggling. Like and fundamentally really helpful. Like the other day I was like trying to do something where I was like the App Store was returning like country codes, and I was like, oh, it'd be really nice to have that as like just like the country flags emoji. Yeah. And I was like started going down the list and just like manually converting them, and I looked and there was like 150 or something, and I was like, surely like ChatGPT can just do this. And yeah, sure enough, it just 3 seconds later it had the entire like Swift dictionary mapped. And stuff like that. I was like, that's really cool. And I don't feel like that's threatening me as a developer in the same way like a nail gun didn't threaten like a carpenter who used a hammer typically. Like it's I'm like it's a really weird thing for me to like kind of speculate on, because I think it's really cool. It can potentially be really scary. I don't think I'm quite as like, oh my God, like I have 6 months left of programming before my job's replaced, as like kind of waving the flag like some people are. But 100% do see the fear and how powerful they're getting and how that can be scary. So it's definitely going to be an interesting few years in terms of where stuff like that and deep fakes and Midjourney and just all this AI stuff is going, because like it really feels like 3 years ago this was like not a topic we were having, and now suddenly it's like all anyone is talking about.
I think it's definitely a good replacement for a spreadsheet. Like I would have done the country code stuff in a spreadsheet. But like
sure.
any like advanced code, I usually run into a brick wall, or like podcast titles. Honestly, I've used that a few times here, and they kind of are very formulaic after a while.
And it's just those formulaic ones that I think that, especially that there's almost like a lot of repetitiveness with it. I think that's where like I'm really excited to have it as a tool, because like one of the dumb things I did in Apollo was I had like subreddits, for whatever reason, when you create them, you're kind of stuck with like the capitalization you stick with. So if you created the subreddit Ask Reddit and you capitalized the A and the R, so it kind of looked pretty, good, Bob's your uncle. If you were dumb like me and just wrote Apollo app in all lowercase, that's kind of how it displays in the app, and you can never update that. So one of the things that drove me crazy with Apollo was you'd be scrolling through the feed and you'd kind of see this like everything lowercase, and sometimes I was having trouble, like maybe I'm just dumb, but knowing like where each word was. So it's like I started the painstaking process of like I just had like a P list where I was like, okay, Ask Reddit, like all lowercase maps to capital A, like, and so whenever it saw a subreddit in the app, it would kind of do a find and replace for the properly human capitalized version. And gosh, I probably did this like 6 years ago, and it was like literally thousands of subreddits that I just did like 100 a night for a month, and it was honestly kind of fun. It was just watching TV and just slowly going through it, and I didn't mind it too much. But I went like maybe like a year ago, I went on like ChatGPT and just pasted like 100 of the raw ones in, and it just absolutely killed it. Like it got every single word capitalized properly, like even ones that like I had to go to the subreddit, just like I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but ones that like maybe it's like ask TO, and you're like, you don't know if that's like TO is in Toronto, so both should be capitalized, or it's like ask to something, like all these things that I had to kind of go to the subreddit to get the context for, or it wasn't immediately clear to me and I kind of had to guess, like it knew the context of, and it just capitalized it perfectly. And that was kind of, it was like, holy crap, like this stuff would be so handy.
It's like the busy work stuff.
That would have saved me like 12 plus hours of work, and it probably would have done it in like under a minute. And it boggles the mind.
What any thoughts on subscriptions? Because that was a big thing. It was like how you kind of were getting screwed because you have annual subscriptions that like you still have to like people could ask for refunds, I guess. You want to explain the issue with it?
Yeah. So basically, the gist of it is if like, say January, you subscribe to some magazine for a year, right? And you say like, okay, I want their subscriptions I want a magazine a month for a year. And you pay for that year up front. It's like $10. And then say March comes along and the magazine says, oh, we've gone bankrupt. We don't exist anymore. I guess in the real world, in that context, you probably just lose your money. In the iOS world, Apple is a kind of a really nice middleman, and I don't mean that sarcastically. Like they're nice in that they're very good at protecting consumers, and they say, okay, this app went away, but it can no longer provide the remaining, like say 9 months of service it promised you when you paid that $10. So you have 9 months left. So we'll give you, 9 over 12 is, 75%. So we'll give you 75%, like whatever is remaining of that $10 back, because they were unable to fulfill that. So if you have, so that's like $7.50. If you have like, say 10,000 subscribers, like that's suddenly, 75 grand or say 100 grand that you were paid all in January all at once, and then suddenly you're kind of getting a bill for that, like, hey, Apple, give us that 75 grand back, which is like kind of devastating as like an indie developer, because it's not like you went to the casino and everything or spent it, but like you have like ongoing costs that maybe you put that toward and or you put it in savings or what have you, and then suddenly it's all being clawed back, like this money that you thought you had, and that can be like very, very devastating. And Apollo kind of had that issue where it was like literally that, where there's a lot of people who maybe a few months before everything went down paid for a year up front, and then Apollo was suddenly unable to give that because Reddit was effectively shutting down the API. So Apollo through Apple would have had to like refund the prorated amount remaining on your subscription. And that was where Apple is awesome, like really, really nice to work with. They were kind of like, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to work with you. And you can add like an option in your app where a user can say like, hey, I'm a really nice person. I don't need that refund. Like, I feel like I got my money's worth with Apollo. You know what? Don't worry about it. So if they had that $7.50 left, they'd just say, you know, call it a wash. Don't worry about it. And that was a really nice option because every single one of those person who did that was basically money I didn't have to pay back. So I guess that's the explanation. It was one of those things where it was costly, but it was one of those things where it's also like not much you can do either way.
Did you?
Like it's kind of hard to escape.
How did people did most people handle that pretty well?
Yeah. People were very generous with them. I was very happy with how people acted.
It seems like, do you think there's a better solution that Apple could implement when it comes to subscriptions for that? Did you talk to them? Because we all know like the Tweetbot folks and stuff had run into the same issues a few months ago.
And honestly, they were phenomenal too. I was talking to like Craig and Paul, and they gave me like a lot of advice and even shared code with how they kind of handled it on like the kind of systematic side. They were phenomenal help. Apple was like phenomenal help. I had like calls with them, lots of emails back and forth with how to do things, and they were, you know, very kind and apologetic that this was happening. Not like it was their fault, but they're like sympathetic, I guess would be the word.
Mm-hmm.
And they were phenomenal. And in terms of anything they could do differently, honestly, not really. Like that's just kind of how the system works. Like if the developer wants to offer a yearly subscription, they kind of have to be able to follow through with that. Yeah. And if they can't, that's kind of like where Apple comes in as kind of the middleman of the platform, and where kind of being the middleman between developers and the user, that's like a big benefit for users, that they can kind of be protected in that capacity. And outside of like, I don't think there's really anything Apple can do, nor would I really want them to. Like it's just an unfortunate situation for everybody, I suppose.
Yeah. So 2 more questions about just one more really.
All you got.
Okay, cool. What were some of the features you wished you got in before the end of Apollo?
Got so many. I guess three I can think of off the top of my head was the iPad app. It still had a decent amount to go, but I was so happy with how that was coming. It kind of had this cool, like I teased the picture on Twitter, but it was basically like this cool multi-pane layout that took a lot more advantage of the screen real estate the iPad had to offer. And I was really excited to kind of get that out. And it felt very much kind of like, if you remember Twitter for iPad way back in like 2011, kind of that multi-pane, like very gestural UI. I was really excited to get people to play with that. And a lot of work went into that. So it was, and I learned a lot, so it's not all for loss, but it was, I was sad to see that not make it out. I had like a kind of like a gallery feature where you could view a subreddit more picturally, I guess, for lack of a better term. So like if it was very media heavy, like
an Instagram kind of, or
yeah, exactly.
Or YouTube,
so
I guess, I don't know.
Yeah. So you could go in and kind of just blow the subreddit out, and kind of just view all the thumbnails and whatnot and dive into them. And that was a really nice way to view some like picture heavy or video heavy subreddits. And the other thing like that I put a lot of work in, and I still might do a blog post on sometime because it was a lot of trial and error, was getting kind of like a cloud syncing system working where like if you read one post on your iPhone, like it would kind of sync that you read that post to your iPad, or certain like preferences like what theme you have enabled. Because that was one of those things that was like, it's I had so many users be like, why don't you just enable that? It must be so easy. And it's like, it is so difficult to get right. Like, there's just so many things that can go wrong with cloud syncing.
And especially multiple devices. Yeah,
exactly. And so that was one that I had a solid amount of work done, and would have been really cool to see make it out the door. But it also would have been a really stressful one just to make sure I didn't do something colossally wrong. So maybe I'm glad I didn't have to deal with the stress of that. But your backend's
Ruby, right? If I'm correct.
No, actually, it might have been at one point, but it's mostly Go now. And so I liked Go because it was pretty similar to Swift in a lot of ways, and it was very fast. and it was compiled, which was nice.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I wasn't writing any of the Go myself. I had like someone who used Apollo reach out to me on Twitter and was like, his name's Andre, and he was super nice. And we ended up working together probably like the last year and a half, and he ended up like doing all the server stuff, and it got so much smoother and faster. And that was the other great thing about Go, is that it's, I'm sure like Ruby, but there's no shortage of people who are really good at it.
Yeah.
I think Andre was a cut above even a normal good person, but it was.
But his expertise was Go.
Yeah, exactly. He was. When I met him, he was working on Amazon and some of like the back end stuff. So he was like a super talented guy, and still is. And we still work together on stuff. But it was one of those things where it was just so nice to have, like, I'm more of an iOS developer. I'm not like, the back end stuff was kind of me feeling around in the dark.
Yeah.
And having somebody who would come in and handle that, who actually knew what they were doing, was just like, oh, so nice. So much.
Well, yeah, especially as a designer, like, you don't want to
Yeah.
have to deal with database maintenance and crap. Yeah, I get it. All right, fun stuff. What are you working on now?
So the main thing I'm working on now is I've been doing a lot of work on pixel palettes for iOS 17, because there's like a lot of good like goodies for iOS 17 around like a lot of the new widget stuff that I'm really excited to play around with, because it kind of feels like something that's almost born for pixel pals and having some fun there.
You were saying something about like interactive widgets being a big thing, right?
Yeah. So it's one of those things where like that's something I would have loved to have had, like the Pixel Pals 1.0 launch, is being able to interact with them in some capacity when they're like in the widget state or in the live activity state. And the fact that you can do that now on iOS 17, and it's really powerful, is like, I don't have all of it implemented, but there's just so many like fun little ideas for little stuff that I'm really looking forward to building and playing around with. That's I'm like, it's terrible to say, but in a way, like it's almost nice that everything happened with Apollo, because I get to put so much effort into this other thing, which is I guess a good way to for me to look at it on the positive side, I suppose.
I mean, Green App is always easier and more fun when it first starts off than an app that's been around for 10 years, I'm sure.
Yeah, the code base has a lot less like technical debt in some areas too, which is nice. It's like all SwiftUI. It's all very modern.
Well, I wanted to, so going back to what you had talked about earlier about design and notebooks and things like that. So you've obviously, I think when you first started off, I would assume you did Objective-C and UIKit in the first versions, and now you're doing, especially with widgets, you have to do SwiftUI. SwiftUI and design, how do you feel as comfortable? Are you like, do you feel more restrained? Are you just like, screw it, I'm just going to put this in a UI representable or UI view representable and do it that way? Or
like a lot of those. That's a good question. I think I do find myself more limited in SwiftUI just because there are limitations versus UIKit. But I don't think, like, every year it gets less and less, and it's to the point now where I don't think it's anything egregious, and I don't feel like overly limited. There's just a few areas where once in a while where I will just be like, well, for me, like the way I have PixelPal set up is it's all SwiftUI, but the life cycle is still the old school like app delegate and everything. So I still have it's all view controllers.
So
if I do need to do something in UIKit, it's easy enough to just be like, screw it, I'll just do this screen in UIKit. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
So I kind of have that nice flexibility. So I don't feel too limited. But SwiftUI has been able to do like 99% of the things I want to throw at it.
Good.
With Apollo, it was trickier because so much of it is like it's this massive scroll view. Basically at its core, and that's scroll views are one of the areas where kind of even to this day SwiftUI is a little rough at in terms of kind of like moving you around and knowing where you are and whatnot, and even just being like as performant as UIKit is in terms of scrolling frames per second. So that was an area where I would have loved to have taken Apollo, and maybe given a few more years I would have been able to, but that was all UIKit and would have stayed that way for probably quite a while. But all like the little side screens, like if I was doing like a new paywall screen, or if I was doing like a screen where you could edit your notifications, like that would all be SwiftUI, just because it was so much faster and so much easier. But as far as a design perspective goes, I still I've graduated from like a notebook to I do mostly like iPad, like I'll draw on like the Notes app or something. Versus like a pen and paper.
Why is that?
Then, because I just found I didn't like there's the tactility of a pencil is beautiful, but just having like a big stack of notebooks in the closet was kind of getting annoying. Not being able to kind of reference them if I was like away for the weekend. Not being able to kind of like analyze, like be like, oh, I know I wrote this string somewhere, like how do I find that? Like,
Okay,
just kind of
so-
like all the short sides of manual input kind of.
So I think last summer, like I started doing design notebooks, and what I did was I wrote it in a notebook, and then I just took a picture and put it in, like I use Bear for notes, and then I would just attach the picture to a note, like.
That's
Yeah,
fair.
yeah.
I found some nights I would go through like 15 pages though, and I just like I knowing myself, I would not have the discipline to go back and like take 15 pictures. It would not have happened. and it's it's like it's nice being able to like undo something that you didn't like how it came out, or like grab it and resize it and move it around. Like it's once you get past the initial like lack of control maybe versus like a pen and paper. There's like so many nice benefits that I'm pretty happy with it. But beyond
this is
that,
what
like,
I was just gonna say. This is what middle school Leo learned early on. Is why he started doing word processing instead of writing his essays. It's just like save, undo, all that crap. Like you can't do that on paper. Yeah, I get it.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. You don't see too many people handwriting essays anymore, which I guess is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I still kind of I'll go to like Figma after that to kind of like I still haven't quite got to the point where like I'll go right to SwiftUI to like design it, because I still find I'm a little faster and able to iterate a little faster through like Figma or something by just like having like the preview app open on my iPhone and just dragging something. There's no compilation. I can just I don't get attached to anything.
Yeah.
But I know there's some people who are probably even faster than me just doing it in pure SwiftUI, so it's definitely like more of a personal thing than anything. But it's I kind of have that like three-pronged approach, I suppose.
Yeah. I think did Apple do a talk on that this year where they're like design in SwiftUI? I forgot. I feel like they did. Yeah. Speaking of,
it honestly is great for that.
Yeah. So anything else from DubDub this year that you really sparked your interest?
There's probably a ton if I was more diligent and looked through the videos. But like for me, so much of the stuff is like I'm almost like always perpetually one dub behind, because like so much of the stuff is like, oh, it's great if you're iOS 17 only.
Right.
But I'm
well, you're an indie app developer. Behind. You don't even work for a big company, and you worry about that.
Well, I normally stick like one version behind. Because like it would be nice like statistically in my apps, I find like by like October, November, if the new iOS came out in September, like you're at least at 50% of the user base on the new version of iOS by then. But I don't know many businesses, small or large, who are just happy to lose half of their customers on that day. So I normally wait until like it reaches about 90%, which truly honestly only takes until like maybe
December.
April.
Okay.
Well, for my apps, I find like Apollo was very quick. Pixel Pals is a little more general audience, so it's a little slower. But And it depends if they dropped any like major iPhones. Like it wouldn't surprise me if iOS 17 is a little slower because they dropped like the iPhone 10, which is like a pretty beloved phone. So I could see people holding on to that a little. So we'll see. But yeah, like stuff like the new Swift Data, like I'd love to play around with that, but I just don't see myself going iOS 17 only for the near future.
It's very buggy. I'm just warning it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Every beta, it's like a roll of the dice. Let's see what they're gonna break this time. So.
Oh, good. Okay. So maybe it's good I haven't.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. That's very valuable information. But and honestly, that's one of the nice things about waiting like a year is you kind of get these things ironed out a little bit. Which is really handy. But yeah, outside of that, like I'm almost looking more at like the iOS 16 stuff in SwiftUI, like the view that fits modifier, which I find like super handy.
Yeah.
Being able to use that full time, like some of the new app intent stuff that started on iOS 16, like all that stuff, I'm really excited for because now I kind of get to use it like fully.
Yeah.
But yeah. And of course, like for DubDub, like the Vision OS stuff looks really exciting, but it's one of those things where it's like there's no actual date for it yet, and the date, which is like early 2024.
Is it okay?
That's for the US too. So I'm in Canada, so who knows when we'll get it. But so I'm excited for that, but it's a little bit of a wait and see situation where not like wait and see until it's out for 6 months and then build something, but it's kind of like I want to see more of their plans for what they're hoping to do, and maybe if I can get a developer kit to play around with. But
did you apply
I'm
for one?
Super excited for that. I did, yeah. Because I have some ideas for it that I'd really love to play around with. But it's I'm just kind of curious to see where they go with it as a platform and with all this development stuff.
Have you been doing anything with Swift Package Manager?
I've been like I use that exclusively versus like CocoaPods or anything in Pixel Pals, and I've
Okay.
been looking to do more like I forget who I saw on Twitter doing it, but just like the being more modular with your project in terms of like breaking it down into like packages or frameworks or what have you. If anything, just to increase like the portability of the little modules of the project is nice, but also just like SwiftUI preview times sounded really
Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
So I was looking more into that. That's kind of
Okay. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
talk about that offline because I have a few thoughts.
Oh, good,
Okay.
good. Okay, perfect.
What else did you want to talk about? Any big challenge? What's coming out with Pixel Pals next? Or
Hopefully, like for iOS 17 day one, I'll have some juicy interactive widgets in some capacity. I'm not 100% sure completely what form that'll take, but I think I'll have some really fun stuff for that for day one. Outside of that, like I have some other kind of stuff swimming around in my head for ideas, but I'm very one-track minded in that like I know if I start planning anything else or digging into anything else, like the Pixel Pals stuff in the short term will suffer. So I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, get that out the door. Step
and
two
this
will
is
be-
this is why I did not apply for a development kit for the Vision Pro.
that's probably a fair point as well.
Christian, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you online?
I'm at Christian Selig pretty much everywhere. I'm on Mastodon, Threads, Twitter. Yeah, that's my website too. So it should be pretty.
Are
easy
you
to find
forgetting? You're forgetting another social media platform, or do we not mention that anymore?
me. Reddit?
Yeah.
I honestly don't really I'll like check my city subreddit once in a while, but no, I
Are
don't.
you serious?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of like that being a lot or a little.
No, but that like I don't even check Reddit anymore since Apollo's been done. So I'll be honest with you.
I don't really check it like compared to what I used to check it. No, not at all. But like there's once in a while there's some stuff going on in my city that I just like to poke my head in on. But
Okay.
But yeah, I'm definitely that Reddit would not be the best place to find me right now. To be honest. Not out of any shade, just out of practicality. I would say.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion. My company is Bright Digit. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And if you're listening to this on a podcast player, a review would be helpful. If there's anything you want to come and talk about, have a new product or have a new API you want to dive into, got a book, a talk, whatever, let me know. I'd love to have you on. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye.